Welcome to the Don't Pick the Scab podcast, a podcast for men over 40 and successful men and how to heal from their divorce and their divorce recovery. Today's guest is a true trailblazer in the world of family mediation, passionate advocate for children's well-being during and after divorce. With over 11 years in experience as a stepmom, she's witnessed firsthand the emotional fallout of the traditional divorce process. Fractured families, ongoing conflict, and children caught in the crossfire. Refusing to accept the status quo, she set out to create a better way when she couldn't find a structured, affordable, and peaceful solution for amicable parents. She founded Kids First Mediation. Her mission is simple but powerful: to revolutionize divorce by putting children at the forefront, reducing conflict and cost, helping parents work as a team rather than adversaries. Now she trains mediators nationwide to join her in this movement, offering hope and healing to families everywhere. Please welcome the founder of Kids First Mediation, a champion for healthier, happier futures for divorced families. Welcome, Tina Keys, to the show. Welcome, Tina. Tell us about yourself. I got some questions for you.
Yeah, man. Thank you for the glowing intro. This is great. I'm so happy to be here. Yeah, I just ultimately for me, I love what I do. I get to work with some really amazing people every day, parents who are genuinely trying to get through this process in a way that does not cause trauma for their kids and who are really trying to do the work to put the kids first emotionally and not get bogged down in all that conflict. And so it's really an honor to do what I do every day and to talk about it. So thanks for having me.
What inspired you to create Kids First Mediation? What was the segue?
So I think there's a really big underserved market, and that is I'd say, amicable parents and the what I call gray area parents, right? There's always going to be that sort of 15-20% of people who are going to end up in that high conflict litigated dynamic. And that's not really what Kids First Mediation is designed for, right? I believe very strongly that there are a majority of parents who are in that gray area who can go either way, where, their marriage didn't work, they had their issues, and they've decided this isn't just going to be effective anymore for us to stay together. But depending what professionals they find and depending what process they find is really what determines their outcomes. And Kids First Mediation was really founded on those principles of, if I can get people through the door in my office or in the office of another Kids First mediator before all the conflict and the litigation and all that mess starts, then we can potentially get them into a process that really helps them to rebuild the co-parenting relationship instead of further destroying it, and to efficiently manage the actual business of divorce so that they can move forward to that next stage of healing. Because the healing just really doesn't start until we're through that process. And yeah.
So how does Kids First Mediation differ from conventional divorce proceedings?
So the more conventional process most people think of is that 2-lawyer retainer framework, right? We each hire a lawyer, $5,000 to $7,000 to start each, usually, at least where I'm at in my market. And then we're off to the races, right? Heading towards a court date unless we settle first. That's that traditional mindset. And it's inherently adversarial. You can have the most wonderful attorney in the world, and I have some great ones that I refer to and work with, but the process is adversarial. You can't really overcome that, right? We've got two sides, two attorneys kind of withholding certain information because they don't want to overshare. There's a lot of posturing that goes on. It's just a weird energy, and the parents are no longer talking. So it becomes hard for them to even reach agreements because they're not communicating directly anymore. And the Kids First process is the total opposite. My parents that I work with, they generally don't have lawyers on retainer, or most don't even have any lawyers at all. And so it's just me and the parents sitting down just like this on a Zoom or in person and talking, having conversations. Hey, how do we want to deal with decisions relating to our kids? How do we want to share time with our kids? How are we going to deal with holidays? What are the rules around travel? And then we rebuild rapport over a series of 1-hour sessions. It's broken up, right? We're not doing these full day, 8-hour marathon mediations that are, to me, invincible, how a person could sit down and make all those decisions at once. But we break it up. And then eventually we get the parenting plan done. We've rebuilt some rapport. They've built some rapport with me as a mediator, right? Also, which is important. And then we can pivot to the harder topics, which is the finances usually. Once we get to the financials, we already have a pattern of how we can get together and communicate professionally. And it makes it a lot easier when we get to those conversations.
Kind of important to start with the kids first and then go to the other part. It makes it a little bit easier.
Yes, I don't start with finances ever. Like, honestly, the only time I'll start with finances in a first conversation is if somebody's kind of court ordered to find me. Like, they've already started the litigation process and I'm doing a court ordered mediation. But if it's within the kids first framework, we're always starting with a parenting plan first. So ultimately they reach full agreement on everything. But the way I look at it, worst case scenario, if we can't get there on the finances, at least we have a parenting plan done and the kids are infinitely better off because of that. So that's always my aim, is to get that done first.
How do you help parents sometimes shift from the adversarial team to actually teammates?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it comes down to, again, the process, right? If you've got a professional low intervention process, first of all, that doesn't have overly aggressive attorneys who are like trying to stoke conflict, right? That's important. The professionals you choose is so important because they're going to dictate how you approach the entire divorce stage to begin with. So having the right professional really matters, and having the right mindset going into it matters. If you've got that mindset, like, I'm going to take you for everything you have, I want to win, you're not going to succeed in mediation. You just aren't. Both people have to want to sit down and say, you know what? I don't really like you as a husband or wife. But the reality is we got these kids who we have to raise together, like, regardless of how I feel about you, right? We're going to have to be co-parents our entire lives in some capacity. Like, we're still the kids are, so long as we're on this earth and the kids are on this earth, we're going to have to deal with each other somehow. So it's that mindset of, you know what, we may as well accept that reality and try to work forward together to find a way to not just deal with each other, but actually really focus on trying to co-parent well together for the kids. Because trying to wish it away doesn't work. You have so many people, I wish I didn't have to deal with my ex. You do. They're here. They're not going anywhere. So we got to now figure out, like, am I going to deal with that? Like, we can't change that. There was a quote once I read that said, husbands and wives can get divorced, but moms and dads can't. Because you can divorce as husband and wife, but you're still mom and dad. So that reality continues past the divorce.
How do you think you shift or you kind of balance, because you're not a licensed therapist, of course, but you are a therapist mediator. How do you juggle those two?
Yeah. So I come at this initially when I got into this field, I was a coach first, right? Like, working with people one-on-one, helping them. Coaching really at its core, David, it's about asking a lot of questions, right? You just ask somebody so many questions that they eventually come to their own conclusion. And I think for me, I approach mediation the same way. I ask both parents so many questions, and the solution usually presents itself if you ask the right questions. I think where people get stuck is they're in these litigated processes where we're not asking questions to figure out what somebody's interests are or somebody's inherent core needs are. It's more of the lawyers come in saying, this is my offer, or this is where I'm at, this is what we're going to accept. And it's more of a negotiation. Whereas my approach to mediation is more of a conversation. And I think that makes a huge difference, because when parents can come into a room and we're talking about what's in the best interests of the children, and then what the parents are actually hoping to gain from what we're talking about, then we can find the compromise. In my divorce coach training, there's an example that they always give about the orange. And I don't know if you've heard this in the context of divorce before, but two people are arguing that they both want the orange as part of the divorce, right? They're fighting over this orange. And then the coach comes in and asks the question, what do you want from the orange? And one person wants the juice. And then they're like, okay, what do you want from the orange? I want the peel. Okay, so now you take the juice and you take the peel and we're done. But if nobody asks them what they want, we can never get that answer. And both people are just fighting over the whole orange. So this is the whole point for me of mediation. My job is to ask the question of, what are you trying to gain? And then sometimes the solution becomes apparent. And if it doesn't become apparent, then my job is to try to present alternatives to help them choose the one that's actually going to work.
What role does communication play in successful mediation? I know that's a big part. And how do you foster that communication through the mediation?
Yeah. So when I train coaches, or mediators, a lot of the things we talk about are, for me, it's the energy of the professional is so important. If I come in a room and I'm able to create a space that feels safe for both parents, where they can be open and transparent with where they're at without worrying it's going to be thrown in their face somehow later. If I'm creating an environment that makes it feel like we're all one team looking for solutions, instead of they're in separate rooms battling each other somehow to win a judgment, like, that inherently helps communication.
Give me the orange.
Yeah, exactly. But that inherently helps. And then it's for me, I don't know if you've heard of in psychology, right? There's that Pavlov's dogs concept. I don't know if you know about this or if your listeners do. Yeah, you ring the bell, the dog gets a treat. You ring the bell again, dog gets a treat. You keep having this positive interaction. Eventually the dog starts salivating when they hear the bell because they're anticipating the treat, right? And so what happens, I believe, to parents when they're approaching divorce, the marriage has had so many negative points of interaction. All the interaction is negative. So the moment you even hear the name of your ex, you're immediately like the blood pressure goes up a little bit. You get stressed because there's been so many negative touch points. And so what I try to do in my mediation process by breaking it up an hour at a time, it's very intentionally done that way because we're coming together for an hour. We make some decisions. We have a neutral interaction, maybe even a positive one, but at minimum it's neutral. And then we do the same thing over and over again over a series of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks, however long it takes us to get there. And so it's that concept, right? We're reframing their interactions from this really negative space to at least a neutral interaction. And that helps them later when they don't have me anymore, because now they've learned how to at least communicate respectfully and professionally, which before it was all very negative and emotional leading up to the divorce.
How do you address situations where one parent is less than cooperative?
Yeah, so that comes to like what I said earlier, where mediation requires two people to want it to work, right? And that's an unfortunate reality for the parent who maybe is on the other side of a high conflict co-parent where they really want to do it that way, but the other person is just not going to do it that way. I would say for that person, like if you're the one who wants mediation to work and the other one is just not cooperating, there's a lot that you can do to try to move things forward. I would say a lot of it comes down to how you communicate with that person, really trying to set better boundaries and how you allow yourself to engage with that person. Because if you can try to reduce the conflict, you can really influence the outcomes. And then also, whether you're working with a coach or on your own, trying to draft a parenting plan, trying to really get clear on what your financial proposals are and what you are able to come to the table with so that you can come prepared. Because a lot of times too, the issue is people don't do that requisite legwork and then they come into a conversation unprepared to have it, and then we're spinning our wheels. So if you're that person who has someone who's high conflict on the other side, they're likely not going to do the legwork. They're likely not going to do the heavy lifting. So if you can do more of that and come in prepared, you may be able to get a red line from them. You may be able to get them to read the parenting plan and give you edits and work with you in that way, but you might not be able to get them to sit down at a table and draft one together. So that's where you need to adapt and be realistic as to what you can expect from them as well.
Colorado is a 50-50 co-parenting state pretty much off the bat. And I think Florida is too.
Florida is too, yeah, set by statute.
Do you see, I lost my question, getting old is a bitch. Do you see any problems with 50-50 sometimes with parents? Because I remember when I was going through my co-parenting, my lawyer brought up some study where the kids need to be with the mom 80%. And I looked at my ex, I said, hey, if you can tell me I'm 80-20 parent, then I'll agree to that. And she couldn't. Do you ever see that happen?
Yeah, this really speaks to why the order of operations is really important. Unfortunately, what happens too often, David, is because Florida is a 50-50 state, people walk into a consult with an attorney, depending what attorney it is, they don't necessarily ask the right questions. They just say, yep, 50-50 by statute, and it affects your child support calculation, so this is what you should do. And we're not actually asking the questions on how the parent's work schedule is. What's in the best interest of the children? What is their extracurricular schedule? Because the way I approach it is I say to them, okay, look, let's talk about what your day-to-day actually looks like. And if these kids have extracurriculars starting at 3:30 and one parent has to work till 6, it's unrealistic for that parent to have 50-50 time sharing on those days. And you can split, you can shake up, even if they're really stuck on 50-50, you can do that differently than just on a weekday schedule. You could look at making up time in the summer. We can make adjustments for other things to be able to get them there. But I'm always trying to operate from a place of what is going to create the most quality time with you and those children. Because just because somebody has 50% of the time doesn't mean it's quality time. If you're running yourself ragged and every minute you have with your children is stressful, that's not quality time with the kids, right? So I try to always come from a lens of, and there's many parents who can do 50-50 and it's wonderful for the kids and it's great and it works well. but that's not everybody's situation. So rather than starting from a place of, this is the statute, this is the guidelines, this is all the legalese stuff, I come from a human place of, well, what's going to work best for your kids, without even starting to have the child support conversation yet, because I want to first have them talk about what's in the best interest of the children, because then once we get to the finances, we can make adjustment elsewhere to deal with whatever the child support calculates to, right? But we want to focus on what's in the children's best interests first and align on that before we even get to all that stuff that tends to get uglier for people.
What are some of the most common mistakes parents make during divorce, other than what you just talked about?
Yeah, they don't focus on their own healing enough. A big problem, like if you're emotional, you're not making good decisions. Honestly, like you are just not being rational. Even if you think you are, you're probably not being rational. And so getting the help that you need to heal is so important. Like usually there's going to be one parent who's the driving force of the divorce, right? Like usually I have sometimes people in my room where it's a fully mutual decision, but it's rare. There's usually one parent that kind of was ready for that a lot sooner than the other parent. And often I have parents where one person maybe was blindsided or thought they were blindsided. They just didn't see it coming. And especially if you're that person, you need to work on yourself, because you're doing yourself and your children a disservice if you are not getting your head right, because you will not make good decisions. And you're also hurting your children, to be honest with you. If you don't heal, you can get your children all the therapy that you want to get them. But if you're not getting the therapy and you're not getting the help that you need, it doesn't matter, because they're going to feel your stress. And so you've got to work on yourself before anything else. That is where the money and the resources need to be spent first, before you're even thinking about hiring lawyers, because otherwise you're going to hire the wrong lawyer. You're going to make the wrong deal. You're going to go overly aggressive when you don't need to. You're not going to see the forest for the trees, so to speak, as the old saying goes. You're going to get bogged down in the weeds. And next thing you know, you're going to spend 50 grand on lawyers' fees, and you're not going to have made any progress because you're just not there where you need to be.
So how do you measure success in your work?
I actually love this question. That's actually a great question, because when I first started mediating, it was very much, I want to get them to full agreement in every situation, right? Or otherwise it's a personal failure. I would feel really personally responsible for that, when the reality is there are going to be sometimes cases where we cannot get to a full agreement. And that is in spite of my best efforts. They're just factors that are not within my control. So the way I frame it now for myself when I look at success is, are they better off after having worked with me, even if 10, 20, 30% better off after our work together than they were when they found me? Then I can feel like that was successful. Most of my families do get to full agreement. They do. We get through the whole process. They reach full agreement. They file. It's the most low conflict, least litigious way to do it, least costly. But sometimes you do have those cases, and that's just the reality of family law, where they are not going to be able to get to 100% agreement. But if they got a full parenting plan done, that's a huge win, because now the kids they have a more consistent schedule. They know what their life looks like. Their parents are arguing less. So even if it takes them another 6 months to figure out the finances, the kids are better off. So that's a win. That's successful in my book, right? And so that's what I try to measure it on now, is incremental progress, because sometimes it's not going to get 100% there, but 50% is better than zero, 80% is better than zero, 90% is better than zero, right? So that's what I focus on.
So you're a move the needle mediator.
Yes. 100%. Of course, 100% is what we're always aiming for, right? That's what I always start out hoping for, 100%. There's also a reality of factors beyond my control as a mediator, because I ultimately cannot force anybody to do something. That's only a judge can do that. So that is an inherent factor within the scope of my work, right?
Yeah. Time men out there, and we talked about this when we first talked about not being able to control what happens at the ex's house. That's huge, men.
Yeah. I would say, first of all too often you see in high conflict dynamics, there's an obsession with that, right? I want to be able to control more what happens in the other person's house. I'm writing the 3-page email, trying to align on the expectations. I'm trying to micromanage their screen time at the other person's house. I'm doing all these things because I think that they should be raised a certain way. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's a waste of time, because first of all, your kids are adults a lot longer than they are kids. Okay. And they are eventually going to become who they become anyways. And so you see kids who are raised in a very strict household that then go and travel the world in a van. Okay. And or kids raised in a very religious household that then are not religious as adults. And you can only control so much about your children. The best thing that you actually have control over is your relationship with them and how they feel when they're with you. And so if you would take all that energy and focus it in and channel it on your relationship with your children, you are going to be infinitely better off. Focus on what's in your house, building that relationship, building that friendship with them so that when they're 18 and they never have to talk to you again, if they don't want to, they choose to. And I think parents miss this so much, David. They get so focused on controlling the ex that they forget that their child is going to have free will one day pretty soon here. And you better hope that free will means they want you around. Because if you wasted all that whole decade worrying about the other person and making a negative environment for them because you were so stressed and angry and controlling, they're not going to want you around when they don't have to have you there. And that is the saddest thing that you see so often in this space with the high conflict people. It's like, now your kid's 19, they want nothing to do with you because you were a nightmare to be around for the last decade. All they heard about was how horrible the other parent was and how you were just trying to micromanage everything to a point where they're just like, good riddance. And that's awful because now you just literally got it's like the most self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like you just literally created what you were trying to avoid. And if you would have just focused on building that relationship that's really founded in mutual respect and love and trust with your children, now they're going to want to be around you for the next, 40, 50, 60 years that you're on this earth.
Yep. So my friend, when he was co-parenting, he had a rule where they didn't discuss what happened at their mom's house because he didn't want to hear because it was so contentious. And that was the rule he stuck. And bit him in the butt a couple of times, but as long as he stuck to that rule, it really worked for him. And it was a hard rule to follow, but it made it so much easier in the long run.
Right.
You know? Yeah. So he learned early not to even ask what happens over there.
And you know what? I've told my stepsons, we have certain parenting things that we're aligned on. And then there's certain things that we just differ on, right? And I've said this to my stepsons before, and that's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing because they can now see how different people live and different lifestyles, different choices, different priorities, different values. And now as they become adults, the great thing about being an adult human, right, is we get to choose who we become. And so now they get to take the good from us, the good from their mom. They get to say, you know what, I don't really align to that. I don't really align to this. And they get to become their own whole person, taking the best of what they believe is good in all those different ways of life. And that's a wonderful thing. And I think we get so focused on controlling what goes on, but ultimately they're going to make their own decisions anyways. So just give them the space to do that and love your children for who they choose to become, not for who you wanted them to become in the box that they are supposed to fit into. Because ultimately that's never going to happen, even in an intact marriage. Your children don't become who you want them to become. They become who they're going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What qualities make someone a great mediator? Let's go with that.
Okay, yes. So you have to be able to have a lack of judgment towards others. I think that's the most important thing. I have many times, there's been many cases I've worked on where there's been infidelity, there's been financial mistrust that has gone on. There have been things that come up. People accuse each other of certain personality disorders and things like that. And you have to be the kind of person who can say, okay, that's a data point for me because I know now that's how you view that person or that's something that happened in the relationship, but that does not define my opinion of that person because there's so many other factors that went into that. I cannot judge them or prejudge them based on one action or based on one person's opinion of them. So I think that is actually the most critical thing is to be able to maintain that lack of judgment towards somebody. And then I would say also the ability to stay neutral. And that sounds obvious, but I mean in the sense of not trying to impose your own will on people. Because I many times have parents in my room where the way that they're choosing to parent their children is very different from how I would ever parent mine. But that doesn't matter because my job is to help them agree. And so if they can agree, that's what I need to be doing. And honestly, David, not everybody can do this. This is actually the hardest thing about being a mediator is to keep your mouth shut when there's something going on that you're kind of like, man, I would never do that with my kids. That is like wild. It doesn't matter because it's not your family and it's not your children. So that, I think those are very important. I think it's also important to be able to have a certain level of assertiveness. I don't think mediators can be successful if they are scared to speak up when someone is being disrespectful. Like, you have to be able to shut somebody down when they're like going off the rails, and not everybody can do that. That's also a skill that you have to have a certain level of confidence in your voice to be able to stop somebody if they are becoming unreasonable, or if they are, especially if they're becoming disrespectful or nasty. So that's, again, something that not everybody possesses, because it's sometimes hard to butt in. People feel uncomfortable butting in when someone's spiraling. But for me, like, that's something I'm very comfortable doing. But it's, whereas there's the opposite is true, David, for people who are therapists or coaches. You have to have a certain level of soft skills, which honestly, I don't really have. I could never be a therapist because at some point I would just be like, all right, we need to stop this and let's like focus on tangible outcomes. And that's a skill set that is really good for mediation, but not so good for therapy, right? It's good. Like, therapists need to have a little bit more of that. What's the word? I think the soft skills, right? To be able to sit there and really be in the feelings with somebody in a way that I personally, it's not my strength. I'm a big believer you play to your strengths in life. So that's very much why I could never be a therapist. Yeah. Why I love to refer people to therapists.
Off the rails, what is your go-to move? Because I'd be like, hey, shut the hell up, sit your ass down. See, that'd be me. And then lose the patient, the mediation thing, whatever. But what's your go-to? What do you do?
So I would say, first of all, fortunately, because I work with mostly amicable parents, I don't have to do it often, because usually the people I work with, since I do 1 hour sessions, they can self-regulate for that hour, and we don't reach that point often. But if we do, that's where I would separate them, first of all, because I try to keep my parents together as much as I can. But if I'm reaching a point where somebody says something that I'm like, ooh, that was over the line, I'll say to them, look, guys, I don't think this is going to be productive for us the way that we're talking to each other right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate you guys into separate rooms so that I can have, first of all, give you guys the space to decompress, because this is not working, as we all see, right? And then second, I want to be able to, for you guys to be more transparent with me on this particular subject so that we can reach an agreement. If somebody crosses the line of respectful communication, I've had that happen really only a couple times. And because, David, I built a relationship over time with people, like 1 hour a week for a series of meetings, usually it's over alimony, almost always. Okay. It's usually the last thing we talk about. And 9 times out of 10, if someone gets heated, it's alimony. And so when we get there, when I separate them, by then I can usually look at them and be like, hey, look, what are we doing right now? Do we really think this is going to lead to a productive outcome, like the way that you're behaving right now? And then they're usually like apologetic. They're usually actually apologizing to me for their own behavior. They're like, I'm sorry, I'm behaving like this. Like, I don't want to be like this. They just really get my blood boiling. And that's where I can then give them the space to decompress and reset, and then we can usually get to an agreement. But really what it mostly comes down to, David, is like splitting people up and just showing them that the moment that I stop it just immediately sets the line in the sand. And then I'll tell them, hey, like, we're not going to talk to each other like that. And I think you know that, like, this is not productive. And they acknowledge it. I usually don't have to tell them they're being unreasonable, because they're usually the ones that says, thank you for stopping that, because I was being not a good version of myself.
Thank you for spanking me.
Honestly, people actually, this is the funniest part. Like, when people are nervous to like interrupt somebody, when someone's in that space, when they're spiraling, they actually welcome the interruption, because they don't want to be like that, but they can't stop themselves. Damn. So it's actually usually a positive response that I get when I get somebody out of that.
So how do you stay motivated in the face of a challenging case?
So I would say remembering all the other cases that had good outcomes. There are sometimes cases like that where I'm like, gosh, are we ever going to get to an agreement here? But I just try to stay focused on the thing I mentioned before, which is incremental progress, really focusing on incremental progress and not like full 100% agreement. And then, when there are cases that don't get there, which sometimes there are, just remembering all the other 10 cases that did get there and reminding myself that when you go through mediation training, they tell you the outcome is not your responsibility. It's the process that's the responsibility. So that's always what I just focus on, is trying to create the right environment, but ultimately knowing that I cannot make somebody get out of their own way if they are unwilling or unable to do. That's the biggest part. I think the unable, like if they haven't done the healing and they are not emotionally able to compartmentalize and come to those conclusions, I cannot push them there. They're not there yet. Do you know what I mean? And that's not a me problem. That's a problem I can't solve. So that's where I have to just, it's an acceptance thing as well. I think as a professional, you have to just accept your role.
What changes would you like to see in the broader divorce industry? What changes do we need to have in order for it to be a better process?
So I think one of the biggest problems systemically is this viewing this as a legal process, because inherently divorce is not a legal process. Yes, you need a judge to stamp the divorce decree, but divorce is an emotional process. It's a financial issue and it's a parenting issue. And so what is happening is this system is we're set up in the court system, which is not a good process for a family restructuring because it's inherently divisive. It puts two people on sides, no matter how you turn it. When you go to court, it's because you're suing somebody. You got a dispute. So when you've got two people who met each other, chose to get married, had these children, and now no longer want to be together, that shouldn't be processed in that manner, right? Because this is not, the dispute is that their relationship has ended, but it's just a restructuring of a family. So for me, mediation, really, this should be like the first step. To me, pro se mediation, sitting down, two parents and a mediator, should be step one. And then if we can't get there, we bring in the lawyers. But the fact that step one is go straight to litigation, to this framework that's inherently going to make it impossible for you to agree on anything just because of how it's set up, it just makes no sense to me. I think we're in this framework because it's the only one we have for getting people legally divorced. But there needs to be a change in what the status quo looks like. And that's the whole big motivator behind Kids First Mediation and why I'm creating a network of mediators, is because I'm trying to create a movement of mediators who step up and say, hey, this should be a mainstream first option for people, not a fringe option that people haven't even heard of. So that's, for me, it's a mindset shift. And I think there is actually already a huge mindset shift in this industry that's happening. A lot of the professionals of my generation that are coming into this industry have this mindset. And there's a lot of movement towards collaborative, towards mediation, towards all these processes. And I think it's going to be more and more as the years go on because this generation is going to demand it. The generation I grew up in, we had access to internet our whole lives. We don't accept the status quo. We search YouTube for 3 hours before making a decision to even hire somebody for anything because we want to do it ourselves. Like, it's just a different mindset. So I think more and more people of this next decade who are getting divorced are going to be looking for options more like what I do versus more of that traditional way that the parents did it, that obviously did not work, because look at how many traumatized adults we have out here from
Big time.
Nasty divorces.
I try to ask a question you've never been asked before, and it came to me like, boom.
Okay.
Have you ever dealt with a pet problem?
A pet problem, like having to resolve. Okay, so what's funny is there's actually a mediator who I know of who exclusively deals with like pet mediation.
No way.
There's like a whole, I don't personally know her, but I know of her through someone else.
Wow.
And that's literally her niche, is dealing with just pet mediation because there's so much dispute around pets. But I have had cases where it's two scenarios. Number one, they're arguing on who has to take the pets because neither of them necessarily wants to have the responsibility. And then I have a lot of other cases where I've actually had many cases where they've agreed to have the pets go back and forth with the kids. And so they both kind of share custody of the pets still, and they share the expenses, and we write in all this language on how that's going to work. I had my most interesting one recently where they actually had cows, like baby calves. And that was a conversation that we had on how to handle the baby calves, because there's a lot of money invested in those and they are potentially income producing down the road and all these things. So it was like it's very interesting. It's such an interesting field to be in. I'll tell you, like, no 2 days are alike. Every case is so different.
I'm going to have to get that name from you because I want her on the show.
Yeah, I will. Let me figure out who it is. Yeah, I'll figure out who it is because it's so interesting. And I actually know another mediator in another state who specializes in equine mediation, which is mediating, and this actually doesn't have to do with divorce, but it's tangentially associated, where people own horses and horses are very expensive property. So they're trying to figure out how that's all going to be managed. It's super interesting.
Wow.
The niches that people have.
The riches are in the niches. Wow. Where can my people find you on the internet?
My company, if you're looking for a mediator in Florida, is floridadivorcemediation.com. Pretty easy. I work all over Florida remotely with people, and I have an office in the Orlando area as well. And then if you're looking for a mediator in another state, we're about to have our third session of our second cohort right now. We're growing that. So that's kidsfirstmediation.com. So there will be new mediators every quarter being added to that as we grow that movement.
All right. Tina, I appreciate it. This has been interesting, man. This has been fun, especially the end. That was like a slam dunk.
I know, right? It's pets are always an interesting one for sure.
Thank you for your time this Friday morning. We really appreciate it. And we definitely got to come back and do this again. This was interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you having me, and hopefully somebody gets some good insights out of this and better their life in some way, because that's always the goal, right? Is to leave the world a better place every day.